A flight attendant forced a black baby's face into a pillow to silence his cries, but just 7 minutes later, he was the one gasping for air beneath the very same pillow. What happens next will leave you speechless. He tried to silence a baby and walk away, never imagining he'd be fighting for breath 7 minutes later. Subscribe if you believe no uniform is above the law. Malik Dorsey stood at the boarding gate of Crestfly Flight 728, bouncing gently on the balls of his feet as he shifted his 10-month-old son, Isaiah, in the soft fabric sling strapped to his chest. The baby stirred against his shirt, letting out a tiny sigh that warmed the center of Malik's chest. The attendant at the gate nodded for him to proceed, and Malik offered a grateful smile before stepping through the jet bridge. His steps were light but deliberate, every movement calculated to avoid waking the child who had just fallen asleep after a long, overstimulating morning in the airport terminal. The moment he stepped into the first-class cabin, he noticed how empty it felt. Only 4 passengers were already seated, 3 buried in their phones, and 1 older man quietly flipping through a business magazine. The quiet was both a relief and a weight. In such silence, even a baby's breath could sound disruptive. "Seat 1A, right this way," came a voice, professional but clipped. Malik turned to find a flight attendant watching him from across the cabin. He was tall, maybe 6'3", with square shoulders, a pressed uniform, and a jaw so tight it looked like it had forgotten how to smile. His name tag read Victor Haldren. "Thank you," Malik said quietly, moving toward the seat and settling in with Isaiah still nestled close. He ran a hand across the baby's blanket, checking for warmth, then began organizing the small items he'd need during the flight. A bottle, a pacifier, and a small stuffed giraffe Isaiah wouldn't sleep without. Victor remained nearby, watching just a moment too long. "If it's not too much trouble," Malik said, keeping his tone light, "could I get an extra pillow for my son's support? He sleeps better with a bit of head lift." Victor didn't answer right away. His eyes scanned Malik slowly, then flicked down to Isaiah. "We'll see if we have any spares," he muttered, already turning away. The words were standard enough, but something about the tone settled uneasily in Malik's chest. It wasn't what Victor said, it was how he said it. Indifferent, displeased, like a favor had just been asked that shouldn't have been. Malik shook the thought off. Maybe Victor was just having a hard day. After all, everyone was exhausted in airports. He reached over, adjusted Isaiah's blanket gently, and let out a soft breath, trying to focus on the objective. Make it to Bellwyn City, deliver the presentation, and get back home without complications. The engines began their low rumble beneath them as the aircraft taxied toward the runway. Malik looked out the window. The morning sun gleamed off the tarmac, painting the airport grounds in hues of silver and blue. A flash of his wife's face crossed his mind, her last smile before boarding that flight for her volunteer mission overseas. He hadn't expected to miss her quite so much, especially not in moments like these. As the plane gained speed, Malik braced his arm across Isaiah's back, steadying them both for the lift. The baby stirred but didn't wake, and for a moment there was a kind of peace, the kind of silence that only lives in the seconds before something goes wrong. The seatbelt sign blinked off 20 minutes into the climb, and Victor reappeared, walking down the aisle with mechanical efficiency. He distributed water bottles without a word, barely glancing at passengers unless necessary. When he reached Malik's row, he handed the bottle with a motion so sharp that it nearly toppled the pacifier resting in Malik's lap. "Thank you," Malik offered again, but Victor didn't reply. He's just not a people person, Malik told himself. Not everyone is. Still, his grip on Isaiah instinctively tightened. Victor returned a minute later with a thin pillow, the kind more symbolic than useful. He held it out without comment. "Appreciate it," Malik said, accepting it gently and folding it under Isaiah's shoulder for a more secure rest. Victor paused. "Just keep the noise down," he said quietly so no one else could hear. "Some passengers like to sleep." Malik blinked. "Of course. I'll do my best," he replied, equally quiet. Victor gave a thin nod, then moved on. Malik watched him go, unease creeping deeper now, heavier than before. He turned his attention back to Isaiah, whose tiny fingers had curled around the edge of his father's shirt. Malik smiled softly and kissed the baby's forehead. His son was his world, his reason for every early morning and late night, and he wasn't going to let a grumpy attendant ruin this trip. Still, the moment lingered. He caught Victor glancing back once from the galley, just a flicker of a look before disappearing behind the service curtain. It was the kind of glance that carried no curiosity, only judgment. Malik's eyes drifted to the safety pamphlet tucked beside his seat. He reread the section on emergency protocol, not because he needed to, but because it grounded him. He was a man who prepared, a planner. But there was no plan for unprovoked hostility, especially not when it hid behind polite uniforms and clipped tones. He glanced at the baby monitor app on his phone out of habit, though Isaiah was right there in his arms. His thumb hovered over the record button in his camera app for half a second before he shook his head and shut it off. Too soon for paranoia. Too soon for suspicion. And yet, deep in his gut, something whispered. It wasn't loud, just a sense, a feeling, like a tremor in the structure, a quiet misalignment between the calm surface and whatever lived just underneath. The hum of the engines, the scent of disinfectant and recycled air, the rhythmic sway of the jet, it all seemed fine. But Malik felt the shift coming, as surely as storm watchers feel pressure drop before the clouds roll in. He didn't know how, he didn't know when, but the quiet before takeoff was about to shatter. Without warning, Victor snatched the pillow from Malik's lap and shoved it toward Isaiah's face. The action was so fast, so unexpected that for a split second Malik didn't move, his body frozen in stunned disbelief. The soft cotton pillow, meant for comfort, now became a weapon in the hands of the man tasked with ensuring passenger safety. Isaiah's cries turned into a muffled, panicked whimper, and then silence. Malik lunged forward, ripping the pillow away with one hand while wrapping the other protectively around his son. Isaiah gasped, his tiny chest heaving in short, shallow bursts. The baby's eyes were wide, confused, tear-streaked, and red from pressure and fear. Malik's own breath caught in his throat, rage flooding his chest like wildfire, but he held it in, anchoring himself with sheer willpower. His voice, though trembling, remained even. "What do you think you're doing?" he asked, his words quiet but sharp enough to cut through steel. Victor took a small step back, his hands rising slowly in mock innocence. "Just trying to help," he said coolly, as if Malik's reaction had been overblown. "You need to keep him quiet. Other passengers are trying to rest." Malik stared at him, heart pounding. His fingers gently rubbed Isaiah's back, feeling every shake, every heartbeat. The baby whimpered again but was alive, breathing, frightened but safe. "You don't touch my child," Malik said, his voice lower now, controlled, but heavy with warning. Victor's eyes narrowed, his polite mask slipping for a second. "Disruptive behavior can lead to restraint," he muttered, just loud enough for Malik to hear. His words hung in the air like smoke, poisoning the already tense atmosphere. He straightened his uniform, gave Malik one last look that seemed to say, "Know your place," and walked away without another word. Malik watched him retreat, every instinct screaming that this was not over. He glanced around. A man, 2 rows ahead, turned his head quickly away, pretending to look out the window. Another passenger across the aisle looked up from his tablet with unease, as if trying to decide whether he had actually witnessed what just occurred. No one spoke. No one intervened. Inside Malik, something shifted. What had started as a business trip, a quiet mission to deliver a tech presentation, was now something else entirely. He didn't know what Victor's problem was, but this wasn't impatience. It wasn't just a bad day or poor customer service. No, this was something darker, something personal. Isaiah stirred, his fingers gripping Malik's shirt as he gave a soft, exhausted cry. Malik bent his head down, murmuring softly. "You're okay. Daddy's got you," he whispered, kissing the baby's forehead. But as he looked back up, Malik's eyes searched the cabin, scanning for allies, for witnesses, for anything that might offer clarity or safety. There were none. Just cold air, soft engine hum, and a growing sense of isolation. He glanced down at the pillow Victor had used, now discarded under his seat. Its harmless appearance made it even more disturbing. Malik reached into his bag, pulled out a spare baby bottle, and offered it to Isaiah, who drank slowly, calming just enough for the trembles to settle. Every small sound the baby made felt amplified now, each one a trigger for what could follow. Victor returned to the aisle about 10 minutes later. His steps were measured, too calm, too rehearsed. He checked the overhead bins mechanically, greeted other passengers with forced politeness, but his eyes, those eyes, lingered just a little too long on Malik's row. They didn't contain guilt or apology. They held something closer to contempt, a warning, A challenge. Malik's thoughts raced. If I file a complaint mid-air, will they say I overreacted? If I raise my voice, will I be labeled the threat? Every option seemed like a trap. He needed proof. If Victor tried anything again, Malik would have to be ready, not just for himself, but for Isaiah. Suddenly, turbulence rocked the cabin again, sharper this time. The seatbelt sign lit up with a soft ding. Isaiah whimpered once more, startled by the jolt, and Malik gently cradled his head. He knew the crying would follow. It was inevitable. And with that sound would come Victor. Sure enough, the attendant reappeared a few minutes later, this time walking slower, arms behind his back as he moved past other passengers. Malik sat straighter, alert. He wasn't going to let this happen again. His phone, now resting in the seat back pocket, had its camera toggled and recording subtly. He had made sure of it. Victor slowed near Malik's row, looked down at the baby, then at Malik. "Is he going to be a problem for the rest of the flight?" he asked in a low, emotionless voice. Malik didn't blink. "He's a child. He's teething. You'll manage." There was a beat of silence. Victor's lips curled into a half-smile. "Just trying to keep things smooth," he said, then turned to walk back toward the galley. But Malik didn't buy it. The way Victor moved, the look in his eye, it wasn't over. He could feel it in his bones. He gently adjusted Isaiah's sling, tightening it slightly so the baby was closer to his chest. The child's tiny breaths were warm against his skin. The pulse beneath Malik's collar was steady, but beneath it was a storm building. Passengers had returned to their own worlds, but Malik knew he couldn't afford that luxury. Not now. The danger wasn't behind him. It was moving through the aisles, hiding in plain sight, dressed in a uniform that people were trained to trust. Victor had crossed a line, but Malik had made up his mind. Next time, he'd be ready. The line between annoyance and cruelty had just been crossed. Victor lunged. The pillow came down in a swift, jarring movement, its edge striking Isaiah's face with a force that made the infant flinch and let out a startled, muffled whimper. Malik's instincts overrode thought. His left arm shot up, shoving Victor back with a hard jolt that rattled the tray in the flight attendant's hand and sent a plastic stir stick clattering to the floor. "Don't touch my son again," Malik said through clenched teeth, his voice low, his eyes locked on Victor's with a heat that needed no translation. Victor staggered back a step, one hand still gripping the pillow, his other flexing at his side. For a second, the mask of customer service snapped, his jaw twitched, and his lips parted like he might retaliate. But something in Malik's gaze, or perhaps the shifting of nearby attention, made him pause. Across the aisle, a man in a navy sweater slowly raised his phone, the faint blue glow of his screen betraying him. He didn't speak, didn't even look directly at them, but the angle of his phone's lens said enough. Victor saw it. His eyes flicked to the phone, then back to Malik. The tight smile returned, thin and practiced, as if he could still erase what just happened by pretending it hadn't. Without a word, he straightened his uniform, tucked the pillow under his arm, and turned away, walking briskly toward the front of the cabin. His shoulders were stiff, his steps too precise. He wasn't done. Malik sat frozen, one hand cradling Isaiah, the other still halfway raised. The child whimpered softly, his small fists curled against his father's chest. Malik lowered his arm and pressed a gentle kiss to Isaiah's forehead, trying to calm his own pulse as much as the baby's breathing. The air felt heavier now. The buzz of the engine was no longer background noise, it was the only sound filling the space between them, humming with dread. The rows around him had fallen quiet. People were watching now, even if only from the corners of their eyes. One man stared openly. Another pretended to read the safety card but hadn't turned a page in minutes. Malik wasn't sure who had seen what, but it no longer mattered. He had to assume eyes were on him, and that was both a blessing and a danger. He reached down carefully, pulled his phone from the side pocket of the seat, and opened the camera app. With practiced calm, he positioned it against the diaper bag on his lap and tilted it slightly, the lens aimed toward the aisle. The record light blinked on silently. He couldn't take chances. Not now. Malik's mind worked in layers. What just happened, what might happen next, and how to prepare for it. Victor hadn't acted like someone who made a mistake. He had been deliberate, controlled. There was no stumble, no apology, not even the hollow words flight attendants usually offered in tense moments. That pillow hadn't been an accident. And if Victor was willing to do it once, no, twice, he would do it again. What disturbed Malik most wasn't the aggression itself, it was the eerie quiet afterward, the way Victor had withdrawn without protest, like a man with a plan, like someone who wasn't worried about consequences because he believed there wouldn't be any. Malik's breath slowed, his grip around Isaiah firm but gentle. He couldn't afford to panic. He thought about his wife, thousands of miles away, her voice always calm even in the worst storms. He thought about the promise he made her when she left. "I've got him. He'll be safe." He would not break that promise. Movement drew his eye. Far ahead, just past the curtain separating first class from the galley, Victor's silhouette appeared briefly. He wasn't alone. Another crew member, slimmer, shorter, bald, was standing with him. Their heads leaned close in quiet conversation. Malik couldn't hear them, but the way Victor pointed toward the cabin, then tapped a finger against his own chest, made his stomach turn. They were talking about him. He adjusted the sling around Isaiah, ensuring the baby's face was fully visible and his breathing unobstructed. He didn't trust anything now, not the blankets, not the pillows, not even the overhead light Victor had turned off earlier without asking. Every detail could be a trap, every gesture another setup to flip the narrative. A voice behind him, quiet, male, spoke. "Are you okay?" Malik turned slightly. The man in the navy sweater had leaned forward, his phone still in his hand. "I saw what he did," the man said. "I was recording." Malik nodded, his throat tightening. "Thank you." "I'll keep it going," the man added. "You're not alone." The words hit deeper than expected. Not alone. It was something Malik hadn't realized he needed to hear, but now that he had, he held onto it like a rope in a rising tide. He looked back to the front of the cabin. Victor was gone again, vanished behind the curtain. But the hum in the air wasn't from the engines anymore. It was something else, an electric tension, stretched thin across the space between predator and protector, a wire waiting to snap. Malik tightened the straps of the baby sling and sat straighter in his seat. He had a plan now. He had a witness. He had footage. And he had resolve. Whatever came next, he would be ready. The real battle had only just begun, and it was happening in the air. Victor reappeared with a folded blanket draped over his arm, a practiced smile stretching across his face like a mask too tight to be sincere. The overhead lights in the cabin flickered slightly as he stepped into the aisle, his shadow cast long across Malik's feet. He moved deliberately as though performing for the passengers watching with subtle glances, and halted beside Malik's seat. "I thought you and the little one could use some extra comfort," Victor said smoothly, his tone dipped in false kindness. He unfolded the blanket with a theatrical flourish and leaned forward before Malik could respond. Malik's instincts screamed. He kept Isaiah cradled tightly against his chest, his palm shielding the baby's back. Victor reached in, placing the blanket over the child, tucking it high up on Isaiah's shoulders, dangerously close to his face. Malik's breath caught. The material was heavy and coarse, not the soft cotton they'd offered earlier. "Don't," Malik said quietly, his voice like steel under velvet. His eyes locked on Victor's, unblinking. Victor didn't reply. He stepped back a half step, arms loosely at his sides, but his gaze lingered. Malik slowly peeled the blanket down, folding it himself and placing it beside him, far from Isaiah's face. He kept his hand resting protectively over his son's head. Victor tilted his head slightly, as if amused. Then he turned and walked away without another word, vanishing behind the curtain separating the galley. Malik's jaw clenched. He looked down at Isaiah, whose eyelids fluttered with drowsiness, unaware of how close danger had just come. The rhythm of the engines hummed beneath them, but the pressure inside the cabin was no longer just about altitude. It was psychological, tactical. A quiet shuffle came from behind. A figure from economy approached, moving with cautious urgency. The young man slid into the empty aisle seat beside Malik without asking, keeping his voice low. "My name's Leon," he said. "Leon Merrick. I saw what happened just now. I've got part of it on video." He nodded toward his phone, which was tucked discreetly between his fingers, the screen dimmed but still recording. Malik gave him a measured look, unsure of the stranger's intent. "You sure about what you saw?" Leon nodded quickly. "Yeah, and I heard him earlier. Victor. He was whispering with another crew member near the back. Something about needing to quiet the Row 5 problem before we land." Malik's breath hitched. He didn't need the full context to understand what that meant. The message was clear. Victor was trying to set him up. His priorities snapped into sharper focus. No longer was the goal simply getting through the flight. He had to gather undeniable proof, create a safety net of truth that couldn't be erased or twisted after landing. Malik nodded slowly, acknowledging the silent alliance. He reached into his seat pocket and pulled out his phone, turning it on and angling it so the camera lens faced the aisle, tucked subtly behind his folded jacket. With Isaiah resting in the sling, Malik adjusted slightly, one arm wrapped around the child and the other braced across his own leg to steady the view. Around them, the cabin felt like a pressure cooker. The passengers' low conversations were beginning to falter, their eyes darting toward Malik's row, then quickly away. People were aware now, but unsure what they were seeing or who to believe. That doubt, Victor's best weapon, was already leaking into the air like smoke. Malik's heart beat with a slow, deliberate rhythm. He didn't speak. He didn't move. Every second was now part of a quiet war of nerves. The curtain rustled again. Victor stepped out once more, but this time he was slower, more methodical. He held nothing in his hands, but his posture was theatrical. He walked the aisle, nodding at random passengers, pretending to check overhead bins, all the while inching his way toward Malik's seat like a predator circling prey. Leon's foot tapped against the floor, restless, but he didn't speak. Malik whispered without looking at him, "Keep your camera running, and don't interfere unless he touches the baby." Victor arrived at the row again and stood just beside them, smiling down like a man greeting old friends. "Everything all right now?" he asked, voice bright and empty. Malik didn't answer immediately. He looked up at Victor with unreadable calm. "Do you need something, Mr. Haldren?" Malik asked quietly. Victor's mouth twitched. "Just checking on the baby. You seemed overwhelmed earlier. We're here to help." Malik's grip on Isaiah shifted slightly, enough to draw the child closer without waking him. "He's fine, and I don't need your help." Victor stared a second longer, his eyes narrowing just enough to crack the illusion. Then he leaned in slightly, just enough so only Malik and Leon could hear. "Let's hope he stays that way," he whispered. Malik sat motionless, but something dark flashed behind his eyes. He didn't respond. Instead, he reached over and slowly pulled the blanket Victor had placed earlier from the adjacent seat and dropped it to the floor. Victor watched it fall. His smile disappeared. "Was that really necessary?" he asked, quieter now. "Yes," Malik replied. "Every second counts, right?" Victor's nostrils flared, and for a moment his hand twitched, just a flicker, but enough to suggest impulse barely restrained. Leon shifted in his seat, drawing his phone a little higher. The movement was slight but deliberate. Victor noticed. His gaze snapped to Leon's screen, saw the faint red recording dot glowing at the corner. His smile returned, but now it looked cracked. "Well," Victor said, standing straighter, "I'll let the captain know that your row is being difficult." Malik didn't blink. "Make sure he knows everything." Victor turned and left, his footsteps sharp against the soft carpeting. A flight attendant near the galley curtain glanced up, then looked away quickly as he passed. Malik exhaled slowly. Leon let out a whisper of breath. "He's not done." "No," Malik replied, "but neither are we." The lights dimmed slightly as the captain announced turbulence ahead, but Malik barely heard the words. His focus was locked on the aisle, on every movement Victor made, and on keeping Isaiah's breath steady and warm against his chest. Around them, passengers fidgeted in their seats, some adjusting headphones, others exchanging glances they didn't quite understand. A current of unease was moving through the cabin, and in that quiet, one truth settled heavy in Malik's chest. Every move was now a test of will, and the stakes were rising. Victor's hand shot forward with the pillow, sudden and sharp like a strike. Malik caught the motion in his peripheral vision just in time. Instinct overrode hesitation. His forearm moved on reflex, intercepting the pillow before it reached Isaiah's face. The contact was solid, Malik's wrist twisting sharply into Victor's, pushing it back with more force than he realized he had. A startled grunt escaped the flight attendant's lips as he recoiled, his fingers briefly losing grip on the pillow. It tumbled onto Malik's lap, a quiet thud that somehow sounded louder than anything else in the cabin. Isaiah whimpered beneath Malik's chin, his small body tense against his father's chest. Malik pulled him tighter, shielding him as if the very air had turned hostile. His own heart pounded with a relentless rhythm, each beat roaring like thunder in his ears. He didn't speak right away. His eyes stayed locked on Victor's, no longer cautious, only cold. "Don't," Malik said, his voice low, precise, and laced with steel. "Don't you ever touch my child again." Victor didn't respond, not with words, but his narrowed eyes, his tightening jaw, and the slow, deliberate straightening of his posture said enough. He took a step back, glancing over his shoulder, and adjusted the edge of his vest like he was still in control. But Malik saw the tremor in his fingers, the slight crack in his armor. The illusion was fading. A faint gasp from somewhere behind Malik told him they were no longer alone in their awareness. Someone had seen that. Someone was watching now. And that changed everything. The intercom crackled above their heads, a sharp contrast to the tension filling the space. "Ladies and gentlemen," the captain's voice came, calm but distant. "We're expecting light turbulence ahead. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened as we begin our descent into Belwyn City." Victor didn't move. Instead, he leaned forward again, his shadow falling over Malik like a curtain of smoke. His lips barely moved as he spoke. "You know," he murmured, "crying babies don't always make it through flights unscathed." Malik froze. The words landed like ice down his spine. They weren't vague anymore, not annoyed mutterings, not subtle jabs. This was a threat, thinly veiled but sharpened with intent. Victor was no longer pretending to be frustrated. He was weaponizing it. Malik's eyes narrowed. He wanted to shout, wanted to alert the captain, to stand and demand answers, demand safety. But the seatbelt sign was on. They were minutes from descent, and any sudden move could be used against him. He'd seen it before. Angry passengers labeled as disruptive, arrested before they could explain. So he held the line. For Isaiah. Isaiah whimpered again, a soft, helpless sound that clawed at Malik's chest. His son didn't understand what was happening. He only felt the fear radiating off his father like heat, and that was enough to make Malik clench his jaw, his entire body stiff with restrained fury. Victor's hand moved again, but this time Malik was ready. The moment the pillow inched forward, Malik jerked his shoulder up and used his elbow to knock Victor's arm aside. Not loud, not violent, but enough. Enough to make Victor stumble half a step back, caught off guard by the force he hadn't expected. Victor's mouth opened in protest, but before a word could leave it, a sound cut through the cabin, the sharp buzz of a phone camera clicking on. Someone was recording. Malik didn't look to see who. He didn't need to. What mattered was that Victor noticed. His gaze darted toward the source of the sound. His lips clamped shut. The air shifted. For the first time, Malik saw something flicker in Victor's eyes. Uncertainty. The tension didn't disappear. It tightened, compressed, as though the cabin itself was holding its breath. The engines beneath them hummed louder now, signaling their descent, but inside, all movement slowed to a crawl. Malik didn't release his grip on Isaiah. His arm was firm around the baby's back, his other hand resting near the pocket where his phone sat recording, angled discreetly toward the aisle. Every detail now mattered. Every expression, every twitch, every witness. He didn't speak again, and neither did Victor. But they didn't have to. They both knew what came next. The game had changed. And yet Malik's mind was already racing ahead. They were landing soon. The plane would taxi. The doors would open. And in that narrow window between standing and exiting, Victor could still try to twist everything. Call him violent. Say Malik struck him. Say he was a danger to the crew. That baby cries didn't excuse aggressive behavior. He would have to be ready. The captain's voice came again, this time more businesslike. "Flight crew, prepare the cabin for arrival." The seatbelt signs remained lit, and the attendants began pacing. But Victor didn't move far. He stepped 2 rows back, then turned sideways pretending to check the overhead bin. But Malik could feel the gaze digging into the side of his face. Every muscle in his body stayed taut. He could feel it coming. Another strike. A twist in the narrative. A trap being laid. But now, more passengers were awake to the danger. Phones were angled. Eyebrows raised. He shifted Isaiah slightly, whispering gently in his ear, calming him with soft words that masked his own storm. The baby nuzzled in, breathing against his chest. Malik's eyes remained forward, focused, ready. He wasn't just a passenger anymore. He was the witness, the father, the line between harm and protection, and the next moment would decide everything. The descent to the runway was about to become a descent into chaos. Victor's low murmur cut through the hum of the cabin like a blade. He leaned in toward the shorter crew member with the headset, their conversation hushed but tense. Malik couldn't make out the exact words at first, but when Leon subtly tilted his body toward them, he caught enough. "They said something about neutralizing the situation before the gate," Leon whispered, barely moving his lips. Malik's stomach sank. Neutralize wasn't the kind of word a flight crew used lightly. It didn't sound like protocol. It sounded like strategy, something coordinated, premeditated, and dangerous. He tightened his grip around Isaiah, who had just started to calm, soft whimpers now reduced to shallow hiccups against Malik's chest. The child's warmth was the only thing anchoring Malik at that moment. The fastened seatbelt sign lit up above them with a hollow ding, followed by the captain's voice announcing descent. The soft whine of the engines deepened as the aircraft began its slow drop toward Belwyn City, but inside the cabin, pressure was rising in a different way. Victor stood again. With the seatbelt sign on and passengers ordered to remain seated, his movement felt deliberate. Not a response to duty, but a show of dominance. As he walked the aisle, his eyes fixed on Malik like a hunter locking in on prey. Malik felt the stare before he saw it, the weight of it, the challenge in it. Malik turned slightly toward the window, shielding Isaiah with his body. One hand reached into his jacket pocket and slid his phone halfway out. His fingers moved fast and practiced, tapping out a message to Darren. "Need you at gate immediately. Flight crew escalating. Baby not safe." Then he attached the videos, his own and Leon's, and hit send. A small green checkmark confirmed it had gone through. "Did you get it all?" Malik murmured, his eyes still on the aisle. Leon gave a single nod. "Everything since the second shove. Yours too. I backed it all up to cloud, just in case." Malik exhaled, but his jaw remained tight. "If they try something, I won't let them," Leon said, his voice steady. "You're not alone." Victor stopped 2 rows ahead, turning slowly, his gaze sweeping the cabin but always returning to Malik. He adjusted a tray table that didn't need adjusting, then bent to check the contents of an overhead bin. But Malik wasn't fooled. These were stalling gestures. Positioning. Getting closer without breaking orders. Another passenger shifted in their seat, drawing Victor's glance briefly, but no one spoke. The hush wasn't peaceful. It was waiting. Even the air felt like it had paused to listen. Victor's return down the aisle was slower, more calculated. His left hand brushed against a seat back. His right hovered a little too close to Malik's row. As he passed, he muttered under his breath, just loud enough for Malik to hear. "Babies who cry too much don't always make it through flights unscathed." Malik's body locked. The words weren't just cruel. They were a threat, veiled in civility but sharpened by intention. Victor didn't stop moving, continuing a few rows back before finally settling near the galley, but the damage had been done. Malik's hands trembled, not from fear, but from restraint. It took everything in him not to stand up and shout. Instead, he shifted Isaiah slightly, tucking the baby's head into the curve of his neck and whispering, "You're okay. I've got you. No one touches you again." He felt the baby's breath on his collarbone, felt his heartbeat sync with his son's. But the reprieve didn't last. Another bump of turbulence sent a ripple through the cabin, and Isaiah stirred, letting out a soft, tired cry. And just like that, Victor reappeared. He was faster this time, no pretense of trays or blankets. His hand came up with the pillow again, arm rising like a reflex. Malik saw it coming and moved instantly. His forearm shot up, catching Victor's wrist mid-motion. The crack of contact was soft but firm, a thud of muscle against muscle. Victor flinched, more from surprise than pain, but Malik didn't let go. "You try that again," Malik said, his voice low, each word etched with steel, "and I'll make sure you don't step off this plane without cuffs." Victor's lips parted slightly, not in fear, but calculation. He stepped back slowly, rotating his wrist as if assessing the pressure Malik had applied. A faint gasp rose from somewhere behind them. Another passenger had seen it. "Good. Let them see." Leon leaned forward, whispering urgently, "That's twice now. Recorded." He can't play innocent anymore. Malik didn't respond. His eyes followed Victor, who retreated down the aisle again, but not before casting one last glance back. This time, not with anger, but with wariness. For the first time, Victor looked uncertain. The cabin lights dimmed as the plane began final descent. The window view shifted to reveal the city below, Belwyn, a glittering map of lights under the dusk sky. So close now. Malik rested his forehead lightly against Isaiah's. He didn't feel relief? Not yet. Too many pieces were still in motion. Too many questions unanswered. But one thing was certain. Victor wasn't finished. And neither was he. The runway was in sight, but the real landing was still far away. The wheels touched the tarmac with a muted thud, and for a fleeting second the cabin exhaled a collective breath, relieved perhaps that the flight was nearing its end. But for Malik Dorsey, that sound marked the beginning of something far more dangerous. The moment the plane steadied from its descent, Victor Haldren's posture shifted with unnerving precision. Gone was the tense, looming figure who had repeatedly violated Malik's space. In his place stood a man draped in counterfeit calm, his expression an exaggerated mask of composure. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain calm," Victor announced loudly, his voice slicing through the cabin like a knife wrapped in silk. "For everyone's safety, we will be escorting a disruptive traveler off the aircraft shortly." The declaration fell like a gavel, final and accusing. Several passengers instinctively turned their heads toward Malik, who sat stiffly in his seat, holding his sleeping son protectively against his chest. The word disruptive echoed in his ears, absurd and venomous. He didn't move. He couldn't, not until he understood what Victor was planning. Across the aisle, confusion flickered across faces. Some passengers glanced between Victor and Malik, unsure of what to believe. The tension was electric, heavy in the recycled air. Suddenly, Leon Merrick stood. His tray table clattered back into place as he rose, unbothered by the still illuminated seatbelt sign. "That's a lie," he shouted, his voice sharp with conviction. "I have footage. That man assaulted a baby." Gasps erupted from several rows. Leon held up his phone, screen lit with the paused video, and turned to face the rest of the cabin. "He tried to smother that child 3 times. It's all here. Don't let them twist this." Victor didn't miss a beat. His smile only deepened, but his eyes burned cold. He raised a hand and gestured subtly toward the front of the plane. 2 men, uniformed ground staff waiting at the jet bridge, stepped closer, clearly summoned. Victor's mouth moved silently, lips forming words only they could hear. Malik caught the motion and felt dread rise in his chest like a tide. He didn't wait. He raised his voice, not to shout, but to be heard, to be undeniable. "I was assaulted," Malik said firmly, his tone unwavering. "My son's life was put in danger by a member of this crew. I have video evidence, witness statements, and I will not be silenced." He spoke calmly, deliberately, each word chosen like a stone laid in defense of truth. The murmurs around him shifted, suspicion veering away from him and beginning to settle on Victor. Victor's face twitched ever so slightly. His fingers curled, his chest rising with restrained breath. He knew the story was slipping from his control. Leon chimed in again. "I've already uploaded the footage to the cloud. It's time-stamped, geotagged, and protected. This isn't going away." The ground staff hesitated at the edge of the cabin, their confident steps slowing. They exchanged looks, not of confusion, but uncertainty. The scene in front of them no longer matched the version Victor had likely painted. Malik saw their hesitation and seized the moment. "I urge anyone here who saw what happened," he said, turning slightly to the passengers nearest him, "to speak up, now or when questioned. My child did nothing wrong. I did nothing wrong. The danger came from the crew." A middle-aged man a few rows back nodded slowly, pulling out his phone as if reminded of something. A woman leaned toward her husband, whispering intently. The silence that had once blanketed the cabin now rippled with quiet resistance. Victor's false composure was beginning to erode. His jaw worked soundlessly, eyes darting to the cockpit door as if willing the captain to emerge and restore the narrative he'd tried to control. But no one came. Malik's heart pounded in his chest, but his face remained set. He didn't know how this would play out once the doors opened, but he knew one thing for certain. He had shifted the tide. His voice had been heard. And even if Victor tried to twist the story again, there were too many eyes now, too many truths cracking through the surface. The 2 ground staff stepped back slightly, unsure whether to proceed. Their body language mirrored the doubt now brewing throughout the cabin. Passengers stared at Victor, their gazes no longer passive. They were questioning, judging. Malik adjusted Isaiah in his arms, pulling the baby closer, listening to the soft breathing against his chest. The nightmare wasn't over, but for the first time, he wasn't facing it alone. The truth was gaining ears, but time was slipping away. The cabin doors hissed open with a mechanical exhale, letting in a gust of warm, humid air that rolled into the pressurized space like a wave breaking against glass. The tension inside the aircraft, already drawn taut, snapped into motion. 2 ground staff members stepped in briskly from the jet bridge, both in dark uniforms, scanning the cabin with trained efficiency. Their eyes locked onto Malik and Isaiah almost immediately. Without a word, they began advancing down the aisle. Victor stood off to the side with the posture of someone unveiling a final act. His hand swept toward Malik in a stiff, deliberate motion, almost like a magician revealing a trick, his expression blank, but his intention sharp. "He's the one," Victor said coldly, his voice just loud enough to carry to the surrounding rows. "This is the passenger causing the disturbance." Malik didn't flinch. He kept Isaiah close to his chest, his heartbeat steady but forceful. The baby stirred slightly, the movement grounding Malik in the moment. Before either staff member could respond, a commanding voice rang out from the aircraft's doorway. "That won't be necessary." Every head turned. A tall man in a fitted gray blazer stepped through the entrance, shoulders squared and presence unmistakably firm. Darren Dorsey's badge hung from his belt, not overt, but visible enough to silence any premature questions. His eyes went straight to Malik. Their silent exchange lasted less than a second, but spoke volumes. Darren's gaze then shifted to Victor, and in that instant, the air shifted again, like pressure dropping before a storm. Victor's confident stance faltered, and his hand dropped awkwardly to his side. The flight attendant's jaw twitched, and he stepped back, suddenly uncertain. The 2 ground staff halted mid-step, exchanging confused glances as the mood in the cabin turned wary. Malik reached into his coat pocket and held out his phone, the screen still active. "This contains footage of your crew member attempting to suffocate my son," he said evenly, his voice cutting through the quiet like a blade. "You'll want to see it." Darren took the phone without a word, tapping the screen to replay the video. The faint audio, Victor's voice, the baby's muffled cries, Malik's alarmed response echoed faintly through the surrounding silence. Passengers leaned in their seats, tension thickening with every passing second. After watching for less than a minute, Darren raised his head. "Ground staff," he said calmly, "step back. This is now a matter for law enforcement." The 2 men hesitated. One opened his mouth as if to object, but Darren was already showing his badge more clearly. "This passenger is under my protection," he continued, eyes flicking toward Victor, "and your employee here is about to be investigated for child endangerment." Victor's composure cracked slightly. His lips parted, then closed again. His gaze darted toward the cockpit, searching, perhaps, for the captain's backing. But no help came. The silence stretched thin, fraying at the edges. Passengers stirred in their seats. Some leaned into the aisle. Phones were out again, not in secret this time, but openly recording. Their screens glowed like tiny searchlights trained not on Malik, but on Victor. Darren turned to Malik, voice lowered. "Anyone else record anything?" Malik nodded subtly. "Leon's got backup video. He's in the aisle a few rows back." Darren gave a sharp nod, then turned to the nearby passengers. "If you witnessed any part of the incident," he said, voice carrying but composed, "please remain available for questioning. We're treating this seriously, and your cooperation could be critical." Victor stepped forward suddenly, trying to regain control. "Officer, I was only doing my duty. The child was crying uncontrollably. I was trying to help. The father overreacted." Darren didn't even blink. "We'll let the footage speak for itself." Victor's face darkened, but he stayed rooted in place. He seemed to be calculating something, perhaps whether to push the narrative further or retreat. In the silence that followed, the whispers of passengers grew louder. A few murmured to each other, some clearly sharing their own accounts. "Excuse me," came a new voice. Everyone turned to see a man in his 50s, neatly dressed in a business blazer, standing slowly from his seat across the aisle. "I saw it," he said clearly. "I saw that man press a pillow over the baby's face. Twice." The man's declaration was like a stone dropped in still water. Victor blinked, caught off guard. Darren looked toward the witness, nodding with controlled gratitude. "Please wait just a moment. We'll need your full statement." Victor turned pale, his confident demeanor now visibly cracking. He glanced again toward the front of the plane, but the cockpit door remained shut. No rescue was coming, no support, just the cold unraveling of every lie he had tried to build. Behind them, more passengers were pulling out their phones, flipping through clips, ready to offer their piece of the puzzle. Each one was another nail in the coffin of Victor's defense. Malik held Isaiah tightly, but his eyes never left Victor. His hands trembled just slightly, not with fear, but with focus, with something harder than rage. He didn't need to shout. The truth was beginning to rise on its own. And as the murmurs grew louder and the evidence collected, Malik felt something shift, not just in the cabin, but inside himself. The helplessness he had carried for hours began to lift, not because the fight was over, but because he was no longer fighting alone. The balance of power in the cabin had just shifted. He shoved a black infant's face into a pillow, certain no one would intervene. If you believe every act of abuse must be answered, hit subscribe now. Justice starts here. Victor's voice sliced through the charged silence like a rehearsed alarm. This passenger became aggressive and endangered others, he declared, his tone loud and overly crisp. He overreacted to routine crew handling. We followed standard protocol. Malik stiffened in his seat, Isaiah still sleeping against his chest, unaware of the storm swirling around him. He could feel the heat rising in his body, not just from anger but from the weight of what Victor was trying to do. Flip the narrative. Make him look like the threat. The lie was blatant, but lies told with confidence had a way of sticking, especially in places where power wore a uniform. A flicker of hesitation passed through the cabin. Passengers looked around, unsure of what to believe. For a second, Victor's gambit seemed to be working. Then a voice rose from across the aisle, steady and unmistakably clear. "That's not what happened," the man said. Every head turned. Russell Kane, a silver-haired man in a navy sport coat and rectangular glasses, slowly stood up. He held a calm composure that commanded attention without effort. His eyes locked on Victor, then shifted briefly to Malik, offering a subtle nod of solidarity before he spoke again. "I watched you press a pillow over that baby's face," Russell said firmly. "Not once, but twice. And I saw the way that father had to push you away just to protect his child. That wasn't crew protocol. That was something else." Victor's expression barely flickered, but his shoulders tightened, the edges of his calm exterior beginning to fray. Malik caught the slightest twitch in the man's jaw, the narrowing of his eyes, tiny tells that the lie was slipping. "I can confirm that too," added another voice, this time from a younger man 2 rows back. A man in a gray hoodie leaned forward, one hand raised. "I didn't see the whole thing, but I saw Victor lean in with that pillow more than once. It wasn't right." As if a dam had broken, more murmurs followed. A man near the emergency exit nodded slowly. A teen in headphones pulled them off and said he'd caught part of it on camera. The quiet anxiety that had gripped the cabin now gave way to uneasy realization. The passengers weren't just observers anymore, they were witnesses. Malik's grip on Isaiah tightened, but his breathing began to ease for the first time since the confrontation began. His voice had been fighting to be heard. Now others were amplifying it. Darren didn't waste a second. Moving with quiet efficiency, he began taking statements. His phone out, voice recorder live, he moved seat to seat like a surgeon stitching a broken wound. "Name?" he asked Russell. "Russell Kane," came the reply. "I'm a retired school administrator, and I know what I saw." "Good," Darren replied. "We're going to make sure it's on record." Meanwhile, Leon was already uploading his footage to a secure cloud server. He leaned close to Malik. "It's live now," he whispered. "I've got everything backed up. Even if someone tries to bury it, it's out there." Malik nodded, his throat tightening. The swirl of fear and fury in his chest was now joined by something sharper. Hope. At the front of the cabin, the cockpit door opened with a quiet hiss. The captain stepped out, his face pale and drawn. His eyes swept the passengers, lingering a moment on Malik, then Victor. He opened his mouth as if to speak, but hesitated. This is all under review," he said vaguely, the words brittle. "Company procedures are being followed." Then, without waiting for a response, he turned and stepped back into the cockpit, retreating behind reinforced doors like a man escaping a courtroom he no longer wished to preside over. Victor's confidence fractured at the edges. His gaze darted from Darren to Russell to Leon, then back to Malik. There was no path forward that didn't end with accountability. Malik remained seated, but his presence now carried weight, not just as a father defending his child, but as a man surrounded by truth, supported by a growing wall of voices that refused to be silent. Victor's mask of calm began to erode. His mouth tightened into a thin line. His arms crossed defensively over his chest as if bracing against a blow. He looked smaller now, not in size, but in command. The quiet judgment of the cabin pressed in on him like gravity. There was nothing more to say. The lie had shattered. Every lie was now standing in the shadow of proof. Victor stiffened as the first flash of Navy uniforms appeared at the edge of the cabin. The footsteps of 3 airport security officers echoed against the narrow fuselage floor, their presence commanding instant attention. They moved with practiced efficiency, their expressions unreadable but alert, scanning the passengers before zeroing in on the tall flight attendant now frozen mid-aisle. "Mr. Victor Haldren?" one of the officers asked, his tone flat but firm. Victor adjusted his tie with jerky fingers and replied, "Yes, but before you jump to conclusions," Darren cut through his words like a blade. "He's under investigation for endangering the life of a minor," he said, stepping forward with a calm, controlled authority. "We have multiple witness statements and video footage to support the charge." Victor's eyes flickered to Malik, who stood silently a few feet away, Isaiah held tightly against his chest. The baby stirred softly but didn't cry. The side of his cheek nestled into Malik's collarbone. Malik didn't speak, but his gaze was steady, unwavering. There was no fear left, only resolve. "I have every right to explain my side," Victor snapped, the pressure in his voice finally surfacing. "You can explain it to the investigators," Darren replied, his badge now openly displayed. "Every second you delay is only making it worse for you." The lead security officer nodded once. "Sir, please come with us." Victor hesitated, then slowly moved forward, his shoulders locked and chin lifted as if clinging to a shred of dignity. He was trying to appear composed, but his steps betrayed tension, rigid, reluctant, like a man walking through wet cement. Passengers watched in silence, their phones raised. Some were filming, others simply observing, their expressions ranging from stunned to outraged. The quiet in the cabin was eerie. The tension, once invisible, had finally surfaced into something tangible. The truth had broken through the pressurized shell of the flight. As Victor passed Malik's row, his lips curled in a final, bitter attempt at superiority. "This won't go the way you think," he muttered, but there was no conviction left in his voice. Malik didn't respond. He simply turned slightly, shielding Isaiah more securely with one arm as he stepped into the aisle. Behind him, Leon rose and followed, slipping his phone into his pocket. "Malik," Leon called softly, catching up to him just before the exit. "I'll send every copy of my footage. They won't be able to bury this." Malik glanced back, nodding once. "Thank you," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "This doesn't end here." The moment Malik's shoes touched the jet bridge, it felt like stepping out of a pressure chamber. The air outside was humid and heavy, but it felt cleaner than anything he'd breathed in that cabin. Behind him, the flurry of movement continued as officers led Victor away down the opposite direction. Darren was close behind, already dialing his phone to loop in the on-site police unit. His free hand briefly touched Malik's shoulder, a silent gesture of reassurance, of acknowledgement. Malik didn't need words. He just needed momentum. A few more steps and the blur of terminal lights came into view, passengers moving past unaware that a storm had just landed. "I've sent the videos to cloud backup," Leon said from behind, quickening his pace to keep up. "In case anyone tries anything." Malik's grip on Isaiah tightened just slightly. The baby stirred again but remained peaceful, as if sensing the shift from danger to safety. But Malik knew better. The flight had ended, yes, but the airline wouldn't let this story unfold without resistance. They'd have lawyers, they'd have money, they'd spin their narrative, but what they wouldn't have was silence. And Malik? He had truth, proof, and a brother who wouldn't let go of the scent once he started hunting. He looked once over his shoulder, saw Victor's back disappearing into a corridor, and then faced forward again. The air was thick, the path ahead uncertain, but one thing was crystal clear. The flight had ended, but the battle had only just taken off. The moment Malik stepped into the terminal, the artificial coolness of the airport's climate gave way to the weight of what had just unfolded. He didn't pause to look around, didn't try to process the sea of unfamiliar faces around him. All he focused on was the warm weight of Isaiah against his chest, breathing, safe, alive. That alone was enough to keep him moving forward, one purposeful step at a time. Darren was waiting just ahead, flanked by two men in plain clothes with quiet alertness in their eyes, the Bellwyn City Police Department's Special Investigations Unit. As soon as he spotted Malik, Darren nodded once and gestured toward a hallway marked Authorized Access Only. No questions, no delay, just action. They passed through a secured door, and one of the officers swiped his badge to access a small, soundproofed interview room. The walls were dull gray, the lights soft, the silence immediate and heavy. Inside, Malik sat down carefully, adjusting Isaiah's sling so the baby could rest more comfortably. Isaiah had fallen into a light sleep, his tiny face nestled against his father's shoulder. Malik gently ran a hand over the back of his son's head, his fingers trembling slightly, not from weakness, but from restraint. He hadn't fully let go of the moment in the cabin, the feel of that pillow, the weight, the terror. It was all still with him. Darren sat across from him, pulling out a notepad and placing his phone face down on the table. "We're safe in here," he said, his voice low but steady. "Now I need your full account, every detail, exactly as it happened. No filters. You ready?" Malik gave a slow nod, exhaled deeply, and began. As he spoke, his voice never wavered, but his jaw clenched each time he recounted Victor's hands pushing that pillow toward Isaiah's face. He described the look in Victor's eyes, not frustration, not irritation, but something colder, calculated, controlled. Darren listened without interruption, only writing when necessary. The two officers occasionally glanced at each other but said nothing. When Malik reached the part about the blanket, about Victor's veiled threat during turbulence, and the use of the term neutralizing, overheard by Leon, their pens paused in unison. Without knocking, the door opened briefly and Leon stepped inside. He looked tense but composed, camera bag still slung over one shoulder. "Sorry," he said, giving a quick nod. "You wanted my statement too, right?" Darren motioned him in. "Yes, you're just in time." Leon sat down beside Malik and immediately opened his phone. "I've got it all backed up. Video, audio, even a transcription generator that caught some of Victor's conversations. He was whispering, but the mic picked up enough." "What did you hear?" Darren asked, his tone shifting from brother to detective. Leon hesitated for a beat, then said, "He was talking to another attendant, short guy with a headset. They kept saying stuff like, 'Handle it before the gate,' and 'Don't let it escalate after landing.' But the part that really got me, Victor said something about a clear-up bonus if he could remove a high-profile passenger without incident." Darren's pen froze mid-word. Malik stared at Leon, his voice sharp but quiet. "You're sure?" Leon nodded. "Positive. I was close enough to hear it. He said it twice." Darren leaned back in his chair, his eyes narrowing. The pieces were aligning into something more sinister. Not just a violent flight attendant with a short temper, but a system, maybe even a protocol. He reached for his phone, unlocking it with a quick swipe. A new text flashed at the top of the screen, received just moments ago. No name, just a number. "Drop the case before it turns ugly." Darren didn't flinch, but his eyes darkened. He tapped a few buttons and quietly forwarded the message to a secure law enforcement channel, encrypting it before sending. He said nothing to Malik, not yet. The last thing his brother needed was to worry about shadow threats on top of everything else. But Malik noticed. "Something wrong?" Darren kept his voice even. "Nothing that's going to stop us." Leon cleared his throat. "I know I'm just a journalist, and maybe I'm not supposed to say this, but this feels bigger than one guy losing it. I've flown dozens of times. I've never seen anything like what he did. It was like he thought he'd get away with it." Malik looked down at Isaiah, sleeping soundly now, unaware of the storm swirling around him. That image, the pillow, the gasping breath, the panic, flashed again in his mind like a strobe light. And now, paired with the word bonus, everything took on a new shape. It wasn't just cruelty. It might have been planned. Darren finally turned back to him. "Malik, if this is what it looks like, we're not just talking about one criminal act. We're talking about organized negligence, maybe even a pattern of targeted removals. And if there's a reward system behind it..." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Malik tightened his arms around Isaiah. His voice was calm, but his eyes were sharp. "Then we don't stop at Victor." Darren gave a firm nod. "We won't." Behind them, the soundproof door clicked shut as Russell Kane entered. The older man still looked shaken but resolute. "I'm ready to give my statement. I've got my notes." The room fell silent for a moment. The weight of the purpose thick in the air. Malik looked at each man, Leon, Russell, Darren, and felt for the first time since the flight began that he was no longer alone in the fight. The officer at the door began preparing the recording equipment. The investigation was officially underway. Evidence was lining up. Witnesses were prepared. But in Darren's mind, that text loomed like a shadow crawling up the wall. They were rattling something real, and whoever sent that message wasn't bluffing. Still, Darren kept it hidden for now. Across the table, Malik's eyes had gone from weary to focused. The objective was no longer survival. It was exposure and justice. The pillow was only the surface. Something deeper was hiding underneath. 2 days after the flight, Malik Dorsey sat across a polished oak table in a quiet legal office in downtown Belwyn, Isaiah asleep in the crook of his arm. Beside him was Darren, alert and stone-faced, arms crossed as he scanned the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the courthouse just across the square. The room was still, almost sterile, but charged with the hum of preparation. Papers were neatly arranged in front of Attorney Miles Rathburn, a calculated and unshakable presence in a gray suit with eyes that didn't miss a detail. He had already reviewed the witness testimonies and digital evidence, but now he was combing through the video footage frame by frame, pausing occasionally to take notes in a slim leather journal. "Look here," Miles said, freezing the footage on a frame that showed Victor's hand gripping the pillow, knuckles white, his jaw clenched in a way that betrayed more than just stress. "This isn't a flinch or an accident. It's controlled, deliberate." Malik nodded slowly, his gaze fixed on the screen but his mind swimming with thoughts. The sight of Victor's hand in that moment, pressed against his son's face, still made his stomach tighten. "I want this on the record," Malik said quietly. "I want the court to see this and know what kind of man was allowed to work in first class." Miles leaned back in his chair, tapping the pen against his notebook. "We're going to do more than that. We're going after the man in the machine that kept him there." Darren spoke up, his voice even but heavy with restrained anger. "You think this goes beyond Victor?" Miles met his eyes without hesitation. "I know it does. You don't get this kind of silence from a company unless they've been trained to maintain it." He rose from his chair and moved toward a corkboard already peppered with names and timelines, Victor's previous flight schedules, internal complaint codes from Crestfly's HR archives, and a list of known passengers from Flight 728. There was a meticulousness to it all, the kind that hinted at someone who had fought giants before and knew exactly where to look for cracks. "The strategy is twofold," Miles began. "Criminal charges against Victor for attempted suffocation and assault on a minor, and a civil suit against Crestfly for enabling a culture of negligence and coercion." Malik's jaw tensed, remembering the hollow tone of the PR manager who had called him earlier that morning. "They already tried to buy me out," he said. 5 emails, 2 phone calls, all within an hour. They offered to resolve this privately if I agreed to stay silent." Darren shifted in his seat. "They're worried, and they should be." "They're not just worried," Miles said, returning to the table. He dropped a printed email onto the surface. "They're scrambling. This came from an anonymous tip line we monitor, a message chain between 2 internal team leaders at Crestfly, timestamped the day after the flight. They're already working on ways to reframe the incident publicly." Malik read the lines, his eyes narrowing. "Position Victor as acting in the child's interest. Possible medical emergency. Emphasize parent agitation. Delay press until PR kit is finalized." "They want to spin this as a misunderstanding," he muttered. "They always do," Miles said, eyes sharp. "But this time they chose the wrong family." The moment held still as Isaiah stirred gently in Malik's arms, a soft sigh escaping his lips. The child's innocence against the growing storm only sharpened Malik's resolve. Then Darren's phone vibrated. He glanced at the screen and frowned. "Blocked number," he said aloud, then answered. He didn't speak, just listened for a moment before pulling the phone from his ear and placing it on speaker. A low, synthetic voice crackled through. "Drop the case. Walk away. No one needs to get hurt." Silence followed. Darren hung up without a word and turned to Miles, who remained eerily calm. "They're bluffing," Miles said. "It means we're close to something. They don't send threats unless they're scared of what's already in motion." Malik, though shaken, straightened his back. "Let them be scared. I'm not walking away." Miles nodded approvingly. "Then we move forward. I'll draft the civil suit and push the criminal charges into formal proceedings by the end of the week." As he spoke, Leon Merrick's voice buzzed into the room through a phone call on speaker. He had just finished reviewing his raw footage with a tech specialist and confirmed audio of Victor muttering about a clear-up bonus and removing him quietly before the descent. "That's premeditation," Miles said instantly, scribbling it down. "That takes this from misconduct to conspiracy. We're going to hit them harder than they expect." Darren crossed his arms again, eyes fixed out the window now. "And if they keep pushing back?" "We don't blink," Miles replied, "and we don't bow." Malik exhaled slowly, brushing a finger across Isaiah's tiny hand. There was fear, yes, but it was nothing compared to the quiet, growing fire in his chest. He had started this journey just wanting to arrive safely, but now he was fighting for something bigger, for accountability, for every voice Crestfly had tried to silence, and for a son too young to speak for himself. That night, as Malik sat in his hotel room watching the footage again, Victor's cold expression, the force in his movements, the casual cruelty, he understood the stakes more clearly than ever. This wasn't just about a flight, it was about the system that thought a man like Victor could operate with impunity, as long as the company's image stayed clean. His inbox pinged again. Another offer from Crestfly's PR team, this one worded more aggressively. He didn't open it, just hovered over the message and hit delete. The airline wanted silence, but silence was the one thing Malik refused to give. The footage had barely spent 3 hours online before it lit a fire across the internet. It began with a single upload, Leon's video, titled plainly, "Flight Attendant Endangers Infant, The Truth About Crestfly 728. No music, no dramatic voiceover, just raw, unedited truth. The moment Victor Haldren's hand forced the pillow over Isaiah's face, the muffled cry, Malik's panicked reaction, the confrontation, and the chilling line Victor muttered just loud enough for Leon's mic to catch, "Crying babies don't always make it through flights unscathed." Within minutes, it was being shared by parenting forums, civil rights pages, and aviation watchdog groups. An avalanche of outrage followed. Hashtags erupted across every platform. Number Justice for Isaiah, number Crestfly Cover-Up, number Flight 728 Truth. Malik hadn't planned for this kind of attention, but now that it had found him, he wasn't hiding. Meanwhile, inside a clean, glass-walled law office perched above Belwyn's financial district, attorney Miles Rathburn sat at the head of a conference table littered with statements, printouts, and digital tablets. The lights overhead buzzed faintly, casting a sterile glow on the surface as Malik paced near the window, Isaiah asleep in his sling. Leon sat nearby, eyes flicking between the television reports and his own phone. Darren stood with arms crossed, jaw set, watching the city below. Miles looked up from the latest response from Crestfly's legal team. "They're leaning into a misdirection strategy," he said, tapping the screen. "They're calling Victor's actions a misinterpreted safety intervention and suggesting your reaction was emotional exaggeration." Malik stopped pacing. "Exaggeration? He nearly suffocated my son." "They're banking on doubt," Miles replied calmly, though his eyes were sharp. "They're also accusing you of trying to use the incident to push a personal agenda." Darren scoffed. "Yeah, the agenda of not letting a man shove a pillow into a baby's face." Leon leaned forward. "It won't work. The footage is out. People saw it. They're furious." Miles nodded but remained cautious. "Public pressure helps. But in court, we need more than outrage. We need undeniable patterns. That's what pins liability to the system, not just the man." The tension in the room was interrupted by the buzz of Darren's phone. He glanced at the screen, then raised an eyebrow. "You're going to want to hear this," he muttered, already stepping out to take the call. A few minutes later he returned, face unreadable but eyes lit with purpose. "I just got a call from a man named Jarrett Ullman," Darren said, sliding his phone onto the table. "Former employee at Crestfly. He says he has internal memos that show management knew about Victor." Miles looked up, suddenly alert. "Knew what?" "Knew he had a history," Darren replied. "Aggressive incidents with families traveling with infants. Complaints were filed, several of them, but the company marked them as non-escalation priority, swept them under the rug. Objection! The defense lawyer's voice rang out, sharp and urgent, slicing through the silence of the packed courtroom, but Judge Halbron barely looked up. Overruled, he said calmly, his gavel tapping once. On the screen behind him, the paused footage showed Victor Haldren mid-motion, the pillow in his hands, hovering inches above baby Isaiah's face. Gasps echoed through the room as the video played again in slow motion. Leon's recording projected high for the jury and audience to see. Each frame was undeniable. Each second told the truth words had tried to bury. Malik Dorsey sat beside his attorney, Miles Rathburn, hands clenched tight in his lap. Isaiah, quiet now, lay in his arms, nestled in a soft blue blanket. The infant's steady breathing was a quiet anchor in the storm swirling around them. Malik's eyes never left the screen, not because he needed to see the footage again, but because he wanted the world to see it. All of it. No shadows, no spin. Just what happened exactly as it did. Miles stood tall, turning to the jury with measured steps. "This is not about an inconvenience," he began, voice calm but edged with steel. "This is not about a misunderstanding. What you saw just now is not training. It is not protocol. It is a man making a choice to endanger a baby under the guise of service." Across the aisle, Crestfly's lawyers shuffled uneasily. Their lead attorney, Mr. Varnes, flipped through notes he no longer needed. His strategy was unraveling. The quiet confidence they had entered the trial with was gone now, replaced by a growing desperation to control a narrative that had spiraled out of their hands. The turning point had come the day Jarrett Ullman was sworn in. A former Crestfly crew coordinator with a reputation for compliance and discretion, Jarrett had walked into the courtroom with slow, measured steps. His eyes didn't flinch beneath the glare of camera flashes, but it wasn't his posture or presence that silenced the room. It was his words. "There was a policy," he said plainly, sitting stiffly on the witness stand. It wasn't written in the manuals, but everyone in crew leadership knew about it. It was called Priority Clearance Protocol, a verbal code. Miles stepped closer. And what did this protocol involve? Jarrett's hands tightened on the edges of the seat. Flight attendants were encouraged to manage out passengers flagged as disruptive, especially if they caused delays, questioned procedures, or brought complaints that might escalate to formal investigations. And were they incentivized to do so? A pause. Then, yes. Miles let the silence settle. Financially? Yes, Jarrett replied, his voice low. Crew members received bonuses for documenting successful removals before complaints were logged. The idea was to solve problems before they became legal liabilities. Victor was very good at it. A low murmur spread through the gallery. Malik's heart pounded in his chest. He stared at Jarrett, recognizing the weight it must have taken to bring this truth into the light. "Did anyone at Crestfly know about Victor's history with young children on flights?" Miles asked. Jarrett nodded slowly. Multiple internal reports were filed, some by fellow crew. One said he became agitated around crying infants. One involved physical contact with a toddler, all marked as non-escalation priority. Nothing followed up. A beat passed. Miles turned back to the jury. And still, they let him work, alone, unchecked, with passengers who had no idea they were boarding a plane with someone trained, not to de-escalate but to disappear problems before they became public. The courtroom was dead silent. The jury members leaned forward in their seats, eyes fixed, expressions tense. Crestfly's defense scrambled to respond. "Ladies and gentlemen," Mr. Varnes began, "let's not lose sight of the fact that airlines operate under intense pressure. Noise, turbulence, emotional passengers, there are moments that demand quick thinking." "But not suffocation," Miles cut in. Judge Halbron raised an eyebrow but said nothing. The next witness was Darren Dorsey, Malik's older brother. Dressed in his off-duty detective uniform, he took the stand with quiet command. "I received a threatening message within hours of reporting the incident," Darren said flatly. "It said we should drop the case before it turns ugly. I didn't tell my brother right away. I needed to verify the source first." "And did you?" Miles asked. Darren nodded. "Trace the number to a burner phone purchased using a corporate expense card tied to a Crestfly logistics manager." That admission sent a visible ripple through the courtroom. Even the judge leaned back, adjusting his glasses. Intimidation, concealment, Retaliation, Miles summarized. Crestfly did not just fail to protect a child. They built a structure where violence could be called service and justice could be silenced. The jury was given 3 hours to deliberate. They took less than 4. Malik stood holding Isaiah, who was now dozing peacefully against his chest. His arms ached, not from the weight of the child, but from the emotional burden of weeks of interviews, testimony, doubt, and fear. When the jury returned, the foreman stood. His voice didn't waver. We find the defendant, Victor Haldren, guilty of assault and endangerment of a minor. We find Crestfly Airlines guilty of corporate negligence, misconduct, and obstruction of justice. Gasps, camera shutters, a lawyer's pen falling to the floor. The words echoed across the chamber like thunder. Judge Halbron issued the sentence that same afternoon. Substantial financial damages to Malik and his family. Court-mandated reforms to Crestfly's operational policies. Mandatory retraining programs for all domestic crew, and a criminal sentence for Victor. Victor's face remained impassive as he was led away in handcuffs. For the first time, he had no smirk to hide behind. Outside, the courthouse steps were flooded with reporters. Malik stood at the top, Isaiah still in his arms, Darren at his side. Miles gave a short statement, urging other victims of silent corporate abuse to come forward. But when the cameras turned to Malik, he didn't speak. He didn't need to. The sight of a father holding his child, the courtroom behind them, said everything. And as Malik stepped out into the flashing cameras, Darren's hand on his shoulder, he felt the weight of the journey lift, not because it was over, but because justice had finally spoken. The pillow that once threatened to take his son's breath had now breathed life into change. He tried to steal a child's breath and lost his own. If you stand for protecting the innocent and punishing the guilty, subscribe now. Together, we rise. Disclaimer: the story you just watched is fictional. It examines themes of racism, cruelty toward the vulnerable, and the swift reversal of power. Its purpose is to raise awareness about the dangers of abuse, the need for accountability, and the moral duty to protect those who cannot defend themselves while provoking thought about the human cost of violence.